My name is Jeremy, and welcome to Blender for Designers. Let's get started. So we're going to make a basic box, and this is a layout called a dieline. That's the design for the box. And we're going to take this layout, and we're going to turn it into a 3D model. You can rotate, stack, and create cool images from. And so what's great is you can do this even though the box itself doesn't exist yet. It's only a design in a computer. But you can print it out, and I'm going to do that to show you how this whole thing folds. And you notice I simplified the bottom quite a bit, because again, the bottom doesn't really matter. So I'll show you how this works. We're going to fold this tab under here, and we're going to create a box. And that's exactly how you do it. And then the bottom, you can fold these little tabs under. You can take the top, and that's got a little tab too. That feeds nicely into there. So you get a nice little box. I printed this out on my office computer, and I'd highly recommend you do that if you are a graphic designer designing packaging, because then you can really see it in 3D. But as you can see, it's got seams, it's got the die lines printed on. It's not really good for photography. So when you're doing photography, you probably actually want to go grab a program like Blender and render it. All right, so let's jump right in and get started. I'm going to load up Blender here. So the thing here, I'm not going to assume you know a whole lot about Blender, but I'm also not going to go through every little thing about it. So these are actually, I'm loading up the screencast keys, and this kind of shows you the mouse and the keys I'm going to use. All right, so here's a quick Blender 101 refresher though. Skip if you already know it. You can wander around 3D space by using your middle mouse button, which is usually a scroll wheel. And yes, that means you need a 3-button mouse. Now, if you've got a trackpad or a tablet, it's not actually a big problem. You can emulate a 3-button mouse, but just Google that. Google emulate 3-button mouse. And of course, Blender's one weird feature is that you have to select things by using the right mouse button, not the left. So selecting things is with the right. And what I just selected here is a light. This is the camera. And this is the default cube. And I'm going to get rid of the light. You hit X to delete it. And I'm going to grab the default cube. And since we're going to turn that into our box, I'm going to call it a box. And we'll just leave the camera there for now. So anyway, we're going to look at our box, and we're going to figure out how big it is, so we can make this cube the right size. So oftentimes in die lines, they'll give you measurements. So you can see these are measurements. But one other thing you can do is use your transform palette. And if you grab onto the die line, you can figure out, how wide stuff is. So this is 4 5/8 wide by, I don't know what the height is. The height's around 3 5/8. So actually, it's 3 5/8 by 4 5/8. Can I just say that I hate how when you use inches, they always use fractions, and it's just a pain in the ass. So we can actually go right into the cube and go right into the dimensions, which are up here, right here. So what did I say? It's 4 5/8 wide. So we can actually do math here. So 4 plus 5 divided by 8. Doop. And then the y dimension. The y dimension is actually this green dimension. So it's actually our depth. So that's so that looks to be 3 1/16. So 3 plus 1 divided by 16. There we go. And the z dimension, which is this blue dimension here, it's blue arrow, it's our height. So that's going to be 3 5/8. So 3.625. Okay. So the first thing we want to do here with this box is we actually do something called apply scale. And you do that by Control A, and you hit scale. The reason you do that is because, I don't know if you noticed, these all just shifted to 1. The scaling, you can scale something like when you're animating it to stretch it or just bounce it around, but it always has a certain size. So when you hit apply scale, you take the size you scale it to and make it the actual size of the object. The other thing is, I did use Blender units here. These are what they're called, Blender units. Blender can be done to simulate anything from, a galaxy to a molecule, so the units can be relatively arbitrary. Blender does have stuff like inches and centimeters, but we're not using that because it would make this really tiny, and it's only really useful if you're simulating physics. So one other thing we got to do is go from Blender render to Cycles render, because I'm a big fan of Cycles and there's no reason to use Blender render. And then I'm going to go to a front view. You do that by hitting 1 on your extended numerical keypad. If you do not have an extended numerical keypad, you'll have to emulate it like you do with a 3-button mouse. But again, I've used it on a laptop, not a big problem. Then I'm going to hit number 5 on the numerical keypad and go into an orthographic view. And I actually want to get the center point of our box on the bottom. So to do that, I'm going to go into edit mode by going, and that's where you edit all the vertices. Do that, I hit tab. And I just, I can just do this visually. It's not that big a deal. So this is orthographic view, which is kind of a weirdo thing. This is perspective view, which is more like what a camera would actually see. I'm just going to duplicate that to see that. So there you just see 2 boxes. Even though they're in 3D, you don't see any perspective. If I hit 5 to go into perspective mode, you start to see, actually vanishing points, perspective, that kind of thing. So I can get rid of this. You get rid of something by hitting X. So let's go ahead and save before things get out of hand. So to save, you just go Command S like you normally would. And just as Command S works, Command Z works as well to undo, which is so awesome. All right, so now we got our box. Let's get some graphics on it. So let's go back into Illustrator and grab those graphics. You can turn off the measurements, but I'm gonna leave the die lines on for now so we can see where everything goes. We'll obviously take them off later. So I'm going to export, and I'm going to do this as a PNG file. And I'm going to use artboards because I want to keep the same board. If I redo it, I want to make sure I have the same space. And I'm going to hit export. 150 should be fine. One thing I'm going to do is use a white background because it has a white background. So I'm going to export that. And we're going to go back into Blender. And now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to split this view. So you grab this little, grippy thing, and you can split the view. So one of these is going to be my 3D view. This is where you figure out what kind of view it is. This is a 3D view. So that's going to stay the same. And this is going to be a UV image editor. I'll explain what that UV means in a minute. So this is an image. So I'm going to open the image. And that would be Tutorial Dielines 2, Gummy Monkeys 1. And there it is. So now what we're doing is we're trying to get this image onto this box. And the process is called UV unwrapping. I told you I'd say what UV means. Now UV is kind of a confusing thing. It's a kind of confusing jargon term, but if you want to figure out how to do this and you need to Google for some help, you need to know the right term. So anyway, this is UV unwrapping. So what we're going to do, what you actually have to do is you have to cut the box. Shift space to go full screen. So if we look at these die lines, you can see that there's going to be a seam between the right side and the back. So we're going to actually look at the real box and see where that seam is. So the seam is actually back here, right between the right panel and the back. We need to create that seam in 3D and on this 3D box. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode, and that's where we do this. And so this is the front of the box, so we go around to the right, and then right now we can select what's called the points or the vertices. But we want to be able to select the edge so we can make a seam out of it. So this is what go down to edge select. This, by the way, is face select, is the third select option. So, but we want edge select. Let's go to edge select, and then you want to go into shading UVs, as I said, UV, and you say mark seam. So that marks the seam. And we're also going to want to seam out the top, because you're going to need a seam here and here. 3 open seams here. So let's do that. So we go 1, 2, 3. Let me shift space again. And then we're going to mark those. And then let's look at the bottom here. Now this bottom is kind of crazy. The reason that is this is a kind of bottom that actually automatically pops open in the factory. I could try to simulate it, but given that we have no information down here, it's all white, and it's the bottom. How many times are people really going to see the bottom? So we can just pretty much ignore it. And we can just mark it off like it's just some random part. But anyway, to make it unfold, we want to create the seams pretty much just like the top. So we're going to go to bottom and mark 3 seams and hit mark seam. So there we have these 3 seams, and these rip open so we can wrap this 2D image around this 3D object. And the way we do that is so now what we want to do is we want to hit A. A deselects everything or selects everything. So if you have one thing selected and you hit A, it deselects it. But if you have nothing selected and you hit A, it selects everything, which is good because we want everything selected. So then what we can do is we can go to UV mapping, unwrap, unwrap. All right, and so you can see that this is actually the basic shape of these die lines, but it's not quite the right proportions. That's fine, we'll fix that in a minute. I'll show you exactly how to do that. So I had to pause the recording, so these look a little different than they used to. But first, I want to see what they look like actually on the box, even if they're not in the exact right spot. So the way we do that is actually I'm going to hit Tab to go back to Object Mode to get out of Edit Mode. And I'm going to create a new material. We'll call this Box 1. And then how you mess with materials, this is actually just a plain white material now. But how you really mess with materials, you use what's called a node editor. And now I'm going to take our timeline here, since it's a timeline, it's meant for animation. We're not animating, so I'm going to use it as a node editor. Similar way I did with the UV image editor. And I zoom in using my scroll wheel, and I hold the middle mouse button down to move around, and middle mouse button and shift to move around. And then I'm going to add an image, and an image is usually called a texture, and so it's an image texture. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the Gummy Monkeys 01 that we had just exported from Illustrator, and I'm going to plug that into the diffuse like that. And that's how you do it. Of course, I don't see anything, but that's because I need to set my viewport shading to material. So there you go. You see it. It's on the box. You can get a little closer here. It's not correct, obviously, but that's what we're going to fix. So I can actually just show you. I'm going to leave both of these up right now. And you can kind of see, if I select everything, hit A to select, you can move it around, get it close to the right position, and you can also scale it. So you can see that we just got to get it in the right spot. So actually we're going to zoom into here, and I'm going to start by positioning this corner over here in the right spot. So I'm going to hit G to move, and move it into place. There you go. And then I'm going to put my 2D cursor right here. So you do that by using the left mouse button and clicking like that. And it puts the 2D cursor there. And I can use that as what's called a pivot point. And so I'm going to pivot to the 2D cursor. And it means that you can pivot to that, but it also means you can scale to that, which is important, which is exactly what I want to do right now. So I'm going to scale, and you actually see it's pretty close. And you can zoom pretty far in. No reason not to get this actually pretty exact, because why not? So now I'm tweaking it, getting exactly right, but I'm just going to speed right through it so you don't have to see all the intricacies. But you just want to scale. Sometimes you have to scale in the X direction, sometimes in the Y direction. And you do that by hitting SX or SY, and so you just scale in one direction. But let's just wait till I'm done. So let's shift space out of there, and we actually that looks pretty good. Yeah, it looks like we got it. By Jove, it looks like we've got it. Okay, now obviously we don't quite have finished it yet. There's still die lines on there. So, but that's an easy fix. You just change the image that you're putting on there. So to do that, we just get rid of this image. We go back to Illustrator. We turn off the die lines. Turn off the measurements as well, and export another image. And we're going to call it another PNG. Use artboards. You have to use artboards. and we'll call it Gummy Monkeys No Dies. You can actually see I already have one that I've created just to test this. So you export, medium, 100 ppi is fine, white, and you hit OK. And I'm going to replace that, and then go back to here and open Tutorial Dielines 2, Gummy Monkeys No Dies. So there you go, no dielines. And then, but you actually notice, I'm going to tab out. So the model is looking quite good. Everything's in proportion, it's all in the right spot. But one thing I do notice is that these edges are very, very harsh. And you get this a lot in 3D, but in most of the real world, you do not have quite that sharp an edge. Particularly not on a cardboard box. So to fix that, we're going to add what's called a bevel modifier. And see this little wrench is where you get your modifiers. And you can just select bevel, and it cuts off the edge. Now it does it by default a little harshly. So, it just kind of chisels it off, which is not what we want. So we're going to it only creates one segment. So we're going to up the segments to 3. And you can still see there's sort of a lot of facets there. Again, not exactly what we want. But what we can do is instead of having that harsh facet effect, we can use smooth shading, which smooths out the ridges between the two of them. And there you go. The facets are actually still there. So if I hit Z, you can see this is the structure. This is the actual 3D structure. And the facets are still there. You just don't really see them because they're smoothed out. And 3 should be fine. Yeah, you can add more if you're really getting up close, but it should be fine. So we're going to go back to material. And actually one thing I noticed is that this is just a little bit much of a bevel. So I'm going to turn that back down to, I don't know, let's say 0.7. Oops, sorry, 0.07. And yeah, that's a bit better, So you want a rounded edge, but you don't need to be too extreme. So I actually want to say you're done now with the model itself. This is the model. And if you want to export it to another program, this is what you use. I'm going to do another tutorial on how to use this model in Element 3D. So that's where you'd export it from here. You would stop the tape now and go to that tutorial. But I actually want to show you how to make this look right in Blender as well. So let's start rendering. Actually, you can kind of preview how you're going to render by, you notice how we had a material viewport shading. We actually have a rendered one as well. But as you can see, it looks a little flat right now. That's because we have no lighting and no environment. So I'm just going to go back to material for a sec. And so what we want to do is we actually want to create an environment, sort of something to illuminate and reflect things. So I'm going to do that by, you're going to go back to the node editor here, and I'm going to use, these are called environment nodes. And it works basically the same as the node editor for the material. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an environment texture, which is going to basically surround everything and give us kind of illumination and a background and all sorts of other fun stuff. They look kind of like this. They have this funny distortion. And this is actually a page online that I found that has a bunch of free ones. This is one from Pixar. And you can look up in Google, you can look up environment map or HDRI, and both of them will give you some examples. And some of them are free, and some of them you pay for. So I'm going to use a free one because I created it. You can create it using a panoramic camera in Blender. I'm not going to show you how to do that. So I call it HDR test. And then when I go to rendered, shift space, you can see we have a real environment and an illuminated box. So, but we want an image, a camera, the whole bit. So right now I'm going to split this view again. And I'm going to turn this image editor, since we're done with it, I'm going to turn that into a 3D view so we can position our camera in the right spot. And what I'm actually going to do first is I'm going to hit 0 to figure out where our camera is now. I'm going to rotate to kind of where I want to be. And normally I might want a dramatic look like this, but I think I actually want to see the top as well, just as an informational view. So I'm going to move the camera over there. And I always forget that the command to move the camera to my current view. So if you forget the command, you can hit spacebar and then you can do a search. So you can do camera to, there we go, align camera to view. And it is Control-Alt-Numpad 0, but I don't need to know that. There we go. So you can actually see there's the camera right there. And zoom out a little bit. Now we can move the camera. The camera is way too close. So we can move it back in these directions. But another easier way to do it is actually move it on what's called the camera's own axes. The z-axis of the camera is actually facing downward. So I can, I'm gonna get rid of these edges here. So I can hit G, ZZ, and then that just dollies out. Then I can go here too, and I can go G, Y, Y, and then that moves me up and down. G, X, X, left and right. And then another neat thing I can do too is now that the cursor is in the center, there's 3D cursor. And if it's not in the center, you can hit Shift C and Alt Home. But since it is in the center, I can pivot around it. So I can use the camera and RZ, and so I can kind of pivot around it and find my shot. And I can do RXX. Now I'm moving around the cursor. So I can actually lean this back, kind of get a cool angle on this, and maybe GXX. The G's doesn't matter. GYY. Yeah, it looks good. Okay. And then, oh, actually, one thing I want to do is, this is a pretty wide angle lens on the camera. By default, it's a 35mm. And if you know cameras, that's actually fairly wide. So I want a 50. And now that means, since I made it more wide, I have to GZZ dolly out again. And I'm going to remove the pivot point from the 3D cursor. But I'm going to leave the 3D cursor there because I want to put a floor on this so we can have something to put shadows and stuff on. So I'm going to hit Add, or you can go Shift A, Mesh Plane. And you don't see it, but I can scale it up. And this I don't need to apply scale because I'm not UV unwrapping or anything. So the plane I'm going to now call floor. And it's a good idea to keep naming these things because if you have, we only have a few of these now, but if you have a lot, you can get confused pretty easily. Like with our box, we need to add a material. That's the material tab. To add a material to the floor, we'll call it floor. And we're going to go into our materials nodes. And it's a diffuse, and it's not quite fully white, so we'll make it all the way white because I like white. But I want to actually have it reflect a little bit. A diffuse material is diffuse. It doesn't really reflect. So we can make this, we can add a glossy material to this. So to do that, you can go to Add or Shift A, Shader, Glossy. And we'll replace the diffuse shader for now. And you can see the roughness is 0.2. If the roughness is 0, it becomes totally reflective. And if it's 0.1, it goes from 0 to 1. If it's 1, it's almost not reflective at all. So actually 0.2 isn't bad, but it's a little too much. I don't want that much reflection. So one thing I can do is I can mix it with the diffuse shader. And the other thing too is I actually want it pure white like the diffuse. So to do that, we can add Shift A mix shader, and we can mix the two of these. And then this would be all diffuse, all glossy, and somewhere in the middle. And that looks pretty nice actually. So now we have our floor. So we have just a little bit of a hint of reflection, got a bit of a shadow. May want to put a little bit of a light on here. It's already illuminating from the background to a certain extent, but it wouldn't hurt to have a light, and I can show you how to do that. So we create another plane, mesh plane, and raise it up, And we can, this is actually the light, the plane itself is going to be a light. So I'm going to move it to the front, scale it up, scale in X, widen it out, and then RX to rotate it a bit. So it's going to act kind of like a softbox, you know, kind of an overhead softbox, very standard studio, you know, kind of flat studio lighting. So to do that, we need to put some light on it, so we can add a new material. Instead of diffuse or a glossy, we can use a emission. You can change the material here as well. An emission means it emits light, unsurprisingly. I'm going to get out of frame. So it's at 1. Let's put it at 3. And then let's actually, I want to move it, hit 7 to get the overhead view, and hit 5 to get orthographic. I'm actually going to rotate it a bit, and then I'm just going to move it over a bit to the right, so we have it's a bit more directional. So, I'm actually going to pull out a little bit, GZZ again, and then now we can start to render for real. One more thing is, because I think I want to make the background transparent so we can composite in Photoshop. To do that, you can go to the render settings and hit film and set that as transparent. And so now this will be render as transparent. Another thing, I'm going to pull the floor up a little bit because I only need that shadow / reflection. So we actually don't need all this stuff, so we can just get it here. And then I am ready to render almost. One thing I do want to do is I want to be able to separate this package from the floor and the rest of the scene. So there's a couple ways to do that. They all involve the passes, the render passes. And one of them is going to involve the object index, and one of them is going to involve the UV. I'm going to use the UV because I actually find this a nice, easy way to do it. So let's render this, and I'll show you how it works. One thing I want to look at is something called the sampling. The sampling is essentially your render quality. Right now, we're in preview mode. So the preview has 10 samples. That's quite noisy, as you can see, a lot of dots. So to get rid of that, you have to add more samples, but the more you add, the longer it's going to take. So I'm going to set the render to, let's do 300. It's look pretty good, but it will take a little bit longer. So I'm going to save first, and then I'm going to hit render. Now here I'm speeding up the video because the render actually takes a bit of time, and I don't want you to wait for it. But I will show you that it's rendering into an image editor, and I'm actually going to go ahead and move the image editor up to the upper left because I want to get the node editor back so we can do some compositing. And then I'm going to go, instead of the UV image, I'm going to go to render result, which is this. So there we go. This is my render result. The reason I brought this UV image editor up is because we can also, the node editor up, is we can also use it for what's called compositing, which allows us to get different elements of the image and combine them and do whatever. But for now, I just can use them to export different elements of the image. So we're going to use, this is the compositing nodes. And we don't have any yet, so we can hit use nodes. And here we go. This is the image. And we also have, so we did all these passes, but the only one we're going to really care about right now is the UV pass. So this is the image pass, and this is the UV pass. And it looks kind of weird, and I'm not going to really explain to you what it is, but you do notice that it does isolate the package because there's black where the package isn't, and there's light colors where the package is. And we can use that to create what's called an alpha channel and isolate the package. And the reason the UV works is because we UV unwrapped the package, and we haven't UV unwrapped the plane, so that isolates it. So the way we do that is we put the image back into the image slot, and then we hit Shift-A again, and we use a converter, and we separate RGBA, so we separate that. And it's the blue channel that's actually the one we want. You can take a look at, this is the blue channel. This is the red and the green, if you're wondering. But the blue channel is all white. But we're not going to stick that in the image. We're going to stick that in the alpha. We're going to stick the image there. And then, so we got that. And we can save the image. We can save as image. So I can say render, and I'll call it A for alpha. But we do want this shadow reflection DLE. So we can also render, so we can also save as the render. Great. So now we're going to go into Photoshop. And I have a big yellow thing there because I was matching tungsten light. And we can go, so we can open render. So what we just did with the floor. And then actually I'm going to use the default workspace here so you can see my layers. And then I'm going to open render A. I'm going to put render A on top of render. And then I'm going to add a layer, new fill layer, solid color. We're going to call this white. And we're going to make it not pink, but white. And we're going to put that on the back. And do that by Command Shift back bracket. That doesn't quite look bright enough because now it's on white. It needs to be a bit brighter. So we're just going to create a new curve. I'm going to brighten the whole image. But now I want the shadow reflection thingy to be even brighter. So I'm going to put a curve between the two layers. And that looks pretty good, but I want to get rid of this edge. So we're going to create a layer mask, layer mask, reveal all, and I'm going to brush it out. But what's nice is because we have this other image on top, we can brush it out without having to worry about the box. So we're just going to brush that out, use black ink to brush it out, and there you go. All right, now there's one more thing I actually want to do to the box back here in Blender. I'm going to play a little bit. I'm going to go back to a 3D view here. I'm going to play a little bit with the material again. So we're going back to our material nodes. And actually what I want to do is just add a slight amount of gloss. Let the background reflect into it a little bit. This could be used like to simulate, like maybe this isn't a matte paper. It could be a slightly glossier coated paper. So we're going to do that. So the image texture is going to stay the same, but we're going to create a glossy texture. So we're going to use a glossy shader. And let's go like pretty light, so 0.05. So it's going to be like a very glossy kind of texture. So right now that would mean it would be basically metallic, but we're going to mix it in like we did with the floor. So we're going to hit a mix shader. And then we're going to go almost down to like maybe 0.05 as well, maybe like 0.1. And there you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see now we actually have a little bit of gloss here. We get some reflection, we get a nice reflection on the bevel there. And we can play with the environment texture too. We can rotate it around stuff. To do that is actually not super simple, but I'll show you how to do it. So you got to go to Input, Texture Coordinates, and Vector Mapping. And then we connect the generated node to the vector node and the vector node to the other vector node. And let me turn the background back on so we can see it. And we can just sort of rotate it and see if we can get some, I don't want that. I want it rotated in Z. And I kind of want to go back and maybe back this off even more to 0.05. Yeah, so I'm just going to tweak this and tweak a bit more. You got to keep tweaking. That's what you just got to do. And now I'm going to set up, save again, set up for another render, and just basically do the same thing I did before. And I can save the passes again, same passes out as images, and go back to Photoshop if I want to composite them. Alright, and now I want to show you something else you can do with this box. So I'm going to go back into Illustrator, and you can see that we have this design for a box, but I want to show you another design I had for this box. This is a little bit fancier because this has some letters carved out, and what I'm specifying as what they call a spot varnish, which is where they use this black part is going to be matte, but this silvery part is actually going to be like a glossy part. So that's very hard to simulate with your like printer unless you have a gloss varnish printer. But it's actually pretty easy to simulate in Blender. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So these are the exact same die lines we had before. So I'm just going to turn them off. So we're going to export a PNG, but of course we don't want to export this. We want to export this separately. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of the varnish, and I'm just going to export this image. Export. Blood Rose Pack ink. Use artboards, 150 ppi, okay. And now I'm going to export just the varnish. So I'm going to get rid of the art, I'm going to get rid of the background, and I'm going to bring in just the varnish. And I want to varnish all these areas. And you can see they're all kind of black. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is that we want to export the PNG, Blood Rose Varnish, use artboards, but this time we want to use a transparent value. So okay. So we go back to Blender. We're going to save this. We're actually going to save tutorial 3B for Blood Rose because I want to keep that original box. So we're going to go back to a 3D view, go back to the box. Actually, I'm going to hit the material so you can see what we're doing there. 2. And then we might as well leave the render view on here. I'm going to go back to the box material. And so now I want the Blood Rose. And it's actually really quite glossy looking now. So I think we want to turn that pretty far down. So maybe 0.03. So it's only a very slight gloss. In fact, I might even go 0.1 here. So yeah, there we go. So that's a very slight, it's clearly glossy, but not super glossy. Yeah, I might even turn this to like 0.01 or something. Maybe 0.02. But then we actually want, so we can just duplicate all of this stuff. So again, same thing here, Shift D to duplicate. What we want in this one is we want that kind of high gloss look. So we're going to go to like 0.1. Well, that's pretty damn glossy. So we'll go to like 0.05. Then we'll up this to 0.05. And so we have a pretty glossy, so we can mix the two of these. Not glossy and glossy. And the way we do that is we're going to bring in our varnish layer, or varnish texture, sorry. So we're going to add another image texture. So let's zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. And this one, so Blood Rose Varnish. And instead of using the color, which is just black, I'm going to use the alpha, which is the transparency. And I'm going to use that to mix these shaders. I'm going to mix the two of them and use that as the factor. And then to do that, I actually want to hit non-color data for this. So let's see what that's going to look like. I believe we have that backwards. There we go. Now we have that forwards. So there, you can see that it's actually reflecting. And going back to our background, if I rotate the background around, and if we rotate this, I can rotate this, or I can rotate the light around, and we can kind of see how it affects things. We can rotate our camera as well, or Z. So yeah, now you can really see how the reflection behaves. So yeah, we can bring this over here, which actually looks kind of cool. Slightly backlit. Maybe rotate the light a little bit. Let me scale, or actually let me just go to the medium point first, and then maybe scale it up nice and big. And then RXX again, or sorry, RYY again, so we can tilt it down just a little bit. Scale X out, yeah. So actually go back, maybe make it even smaller. GXX here to kind of just move it along a little bit here. Yeah, that looks really cool. All right, so yeah, you can kind of see how that would work, and we can move the floor, of course. I mean, we don't even want a white floor on this. Or maybe we do. But maybe we want it to be even more reflective. And we can make that 0.1. Yeah, that looks kind of cool. So yeah, you get the idea. So that's another thing you can do. Another way you can use like different materials to combine them. And yeah, hit 0 to go back to the camera. So that's it. So we made not just one box, but 2 basic boxes. And later I'll show you how to make a slightly more complicated looking box.